Good afternoon, and welcome to the land of the giants. I'm talking about the instruments. Thank you for Leona to liaise and the Wagner Society to give us this opportunity to speak about Ritter's Viola Alta today. I hope you can understand me properly. Please let me know if it's not loud enough. I first came across one of these extra large violas during my studies at the music college in Cologne in the early 90s. I remember clearly when someone interrupted my lesson and walked into the studio carrying an Aldi plastic bag full of viola. These instruments are indeed longer than most XL viola cases, so they are often housed in all kinds of improvised devices. Back in Cologne, it was a plastic shopping bag. Fafner here came in a more luxurious device, a bag for tennis rackets. Back then, when I played the viola, I was immediately struck by its baritonal sound color. There was something raw and visceral about it that I found fascinating. And I felt a desire to own it. It was indeed for sale, but having recently changed to the viola from violin, this was just too big of a shift in instrument size, and most of the 20th century soloistic repertoire seemed to be impossible to manage on such a giant. So I abandoned the idea and continued my studies on a more conventionally sized instrument. It took 25 years and moving to Australia for me to meet another Ritter viola again, and this time I bought it straight away. This is Fasolt. So we got Fasolt and Fafner. I will be playing on Fafner today. But let's have a look into Hermann Ritter's vita. Born 1849 in the city of Wismar near the North Sea. Drawn to choral music from an early age, he sang in the Schwerin church choir as an alto. He also played the violin, and in 1865 he received a royal scholarship to study at the Berlin Music Academy. There he also had lessons with Joseph Joachim, one of the most influential violinists at the time. Ritter remained in Berlin until 1870 and then took up several conducting positions as Kapellmeister, first in Schwerin and then in Heidelberg. But only after a few years he felt disillusioned by the everyday routine of the music business and went on to study music history and philosophy in Heidelberg. Until his graduation in 1874, he supported himself with giving violin lessons. Privately, often he played his favorite instrument, the viola. It is during this time that he studied the construction of string instruments and the question of how to optimize the viola and its sound projection became the focus of his research. Based on a paper from 1782 by the luthier Antonio Bagatello of Padua, Ritter developed a viola design that basically used the proportions of the violin and transferred it to viola size. But in order to achieve the optimal instrument resonance, in order to achieve the perfect violin-like relation between body size and string length, the new viola model would have to be much larger than the conventionally used instruments during the 19th century. You could say, okay, let's build bigger violas that sound much better. It had been done before. Already in the 16th century, there were all kinds of differently sized viola-like instruments around, depending on their use in supporting the various voice registers in the choral music of the time. They were all called viols. Violins were just smaller viols, doubling the sopranos. Viola da gambas, played between the legs, supported the tenors and later become today's cellos. And in between there were several sizes of viola da braccias, played, as the name says, on the shoulder, on the arm. Now, with the expansion of the musical repertoire towards more purely instrumental music, the most brilliant sounding, agile, and best projecting member of the viol family, the violin, started its ascent to fame, equally celebrated by composers starting with Corelli, Vivaldi, by players like Paganini, Tartini, Devil's Trill, we know all those, and audiences that were keen to be wowed. In the 19th century, there were still existed very few compositions in which the viola was used as a solo instrument. There are few examples from the classical era as well, like Mozart's Symphonia Concertante or the viola concertos by Stamitz and Hofmeister. That also meant that there were no real viola teachers around. Violists started learning on the smaller violin, as it's still custom today, and so violas were played by violinists who would prefer instruments of smaller sizes. During the development, most of the fine, large instruments from the Baroque and early classic times were cut down to suit these players. The great Amati family built probably hundreds of large violas in their three-generation time, but only to this day, only 5 of them are left in unaltered condition. So like most of the large violas, not only Amatis, also the Brescian school, were cut down to make suitable for smaller players, shorter players. Hector Berlioz, in his Treatise of Instrumentation and Orchestration from 1843, so 30 years before Ritter started his mission, has this to say on the topic. Here it must be said that most of the violas at present in our French orchestras have not the necessary dimension. They have neither the size nor, as a natural consequence, the tone power of a real viola. They are mostly violins strung with viola strings. These musical directors should absolutely forbid the use of these bastard instruments, whose tone deprives one of the most interesting parts in an orchestra of its proper color, robbing it of all its power, especially in the lower registers. Violists have always been selected from the pool of violinists. If a musician wasn't capable of playing violin well enough, he was given a viola. Well, that's still Berlioz saying this. The reason being, violists could neither play the violin nor the viola. I have to admit, this prejudice has not completely disappeared, that there are still violists in the best orchestras that know neither how to treat a violin nor the viola. By understanding the difficulties of acceptance of such players, the violas will be trusted to more adept hands. Of all the instruments in the orchestra, it is the viola whose excellent qualities have been most unrecognized. It is as agile as the violin. The lower strings have a unique, sharp tone quality, while the high registers emanate a painful passion, and its melancholy character separates itself from the other string instruments. So that's Hector Berlioz. During his time in Paris, between 1839 and 42, Richard Wagner met with Berlioz, and I'm sure the two also discussed viola issues. Wagner later expressed his own dissatisfaction with the violas in orchestras, similarly to Berlioz. Here is a quote. The viola is commonly played, with rare exceptions indeed, by infirm violinists or by decrepit players of wind instruments who happen to have been acquainted with the string instrument once upon a time. It was pointed out to me that in a large orchestra which contained 8 violas, there was only one player who could deal with the rather difficult passages on one of my later scores. To give you an idea of how small the violas back then were, I brought one with me, which is probably the size of what was usually played during the 19th century. So this is 39 centimeters in body size. A violin is around 37, so it's close to violin. It's a bit broader than a violin, of course, but I gave it to a few of my violin colleagues in the SSO, and they love playing on it because it's the stops are quite close together. So this is kind of a difference. This is 47, and this is 39 centimeters.
Could you hold that up again, please? I would love to make a picture.
Sure.
Thank you very much.
No worries. So coming back to our idealist Hermann Ritter, who is aiming to reclaim the viola's own resounding voice. It is 1874 and the situation is dire. The most influential da braccia musicians of the time were violinists, concert masters, and they were opposed to support an idea that would make it harder for themselves when switching from violin to a much bigger viola. Also, the violin makers that Ritter approached with his acoustic findings and the construction plans were not interested in building it. He got mocked by both groups, considered crazy, and suffered many indignation and humiliation. But Ritter didn't give up. This quest was too important to him. And finally, for his new idea, he won the luthier Karl Adam Hörlein from Würzburg in Bavaria. And together they developed the first prototype of his Viola Alta. Hörlein would become Ritter's exclusive builder for the next 26 years. After his death in 1902, the luthier Philipp Keller took over the production using the exact same methods. But in order to make his project a success and spread the gospel of the giant violas, Hermann Ritter needed a major, meaningful endorsement by an influential musical figure who shared his vision for a more prominent role of the middle voice. And who better to approach than Richard Wagner? Especially during this time of musical innovation, the timing was perfect. Ritter, at this point 26 years of age, meets Richard Wagner in February 1876 in Haus Wahnfried. The Festspielhaus was in the final building stages before the grand opening in the coming summer with the first ring cycle. And spoiler alert, the meeting went really well. Now, I can imagine that after all this talk, you must be keen to hear what Richard Wagner heard that day. So we will reenact the first encounter. The work that Hermann Ritter chose to present his Viola Alta with was Wolfram's aria from Tannhäuser an den Abendstern. Cosima Wagner leaves us an eyewitness account of that day in her diary, and she does so by writing from Ritter's own perspective. This is what she writes. I didn't have to wait long before the man who had lifted millions of people through his mighty art stepped up to me. I'm glad you came, the master said, shaking my hand. So you are a candidate for philosophy and viola improvement, he continued. I'll wait for that. So you're a candidate for philosophy and viola improvement, he continued, looking at my paper bag with a smile. That must be the new viola. I had barely brushed the strings of my viola in single and double notes. What she's talking about is tuning. When I saw that in the master's glance, all doubts about its tone had vanished. Wagner's reaction was enthusiastic. The true alto voice. On the spot, Ritter was engaged as principal violist of the Bayreuth Festival Orchestra for the following summer, and Wagner commissioned 6 of these violas to be built for the Bayreuth viola section, even though at this point Ritter was the only one playing them. It took until 1898 that the Bayreuth Festival Orchestra had 5 Viola Alta players in their ranks. All of them had been trained by Ritter in the specific different techniques necessary to manage the size of the viola. Ritter published 2 books on the concept and the history of the Viola Alta, and later 2 very structured study books. All of his writings suddenly were in high demand for the following decades, really. 1 month after the historic meeting at Haus Wahnfried on 28th of March 1876, Wagner writes the following letter to Hermann Ritter. Dear Sir, I truly regret that I still cannot find the free time to speak about your alto viola in as much detail as I consider necessary in order to contribute to giving this instrument the attention it deserves. I am convinced that the general introduction of the alto viola into our orchestras will not only put into perspective the intentions of those composers who have so far had to make do with the ordinary viola, while they intend the true alto viola sound, for the singing be put into the right light. It's very long sentences in German as well. But also that in the entire treatment of the bow instrument quartet, one of the most significant and very advantageous changes will take place. The free A string of this instrument, which no longer has a thin nasal sound but a bright melodious one, will be able to relieve the inhibited middle side of the violin of many an energetic singing, since the violin in this position has so far been hindered in its expression of sound. That Weber, for example, already often had to add a wind instrument, clarinet or oboe, for reinforcement. The alto viola will no longer make this necessary and will therefore no longer require the composer to use mixed colors, where the pure string instrument character was initially the intention. However, I would like to thank you for the dedication of your concise and at the same time instructive treatise, and remain with sincere respect devotedly yours, Richard Wagner. Ritter received the title of Royal Professor by King Ludwig II, Wagner's main patron and sponsor, and from 1879 taught viola at the music school in Würzburg. Here he began to forge a new generation of violists with their giant, enormous-sounding instruments. Living in Würzburg now, Ritter was also close to his trusted luthier Karl Adam Hörlein, who only during the first 5 years after the historic meeting in Wahnfried built and sold 120 viola altas. Here is how we know that exactly. The label inside a Ritter viola shows not only the conventional information like name of the maker, model, and the year of its build, but in addition to that, all instruments are numbered chronologically, which gives us insight in how many were made in a certain period of time and how sales fluctuated over time. So during the 5 years from 1876, which is Fasolt's birth year, and to 1881, Fafner's birth year, we have number 12 versus going up to 132. So we have proof 120 in this time frame were built. This is a lot. An average of 24 instruments built per year from a single workshop in Würzburg is remarkable, and the demand for it is also remarkable. Furthermore, as a performer, Ritter also advanced to fame. He became an international soloist, giving recitals on his viola alta to great acclaim all over Europe, the first ever soloist exclusively playing the viola. Several of his students followed in his footsteps and had successful careers as soloists and teachers. One of them was Michael Balling, who we will hear more about a bit later. The musical circle around Wagner was convinced too of the new qualities of the viola alta. Franz Liszt was, as well as Hans von Bülow, Richard Strauss, Engelbert Humperdinck, who promoted their use in orchestras. Von Bülow even owned a Ritter viola, even though I don't think he played a string instrument, which he later donated to the Prague Conservatory. At the Meiningen Court Orchestra, the precursor of the Berlin Philharmonic, so like an eminent orchestra, where both Strauss and von Bülow were Kapellmeister for a while, a Ritter violist would get a higher salary. And by 1882, Meiningen had 3 Ritter violists in their ranks. The 2 composers that were the first who wrote specifically for the viola alta were Franz Liszt and Max Meyer Olbersleben, a name I never heard before I started this research. Both works were written in 1881, again, the birth year of Fafner here. And yes, Meyer Olbersleben was a colleague at Ritter's school in Würzburg, professor for theory and composition. He later served as the director of the institute. His sizable compositional output comprises well over 100 mostly vocal works. We will now play the second movement of his sonata, Opus 14, dedicated to Ritter and the viola alta. And to get us into the mood of this work, I would like to read out a Ritter quote describing his philosophy of the viola. All string instruments take by nature the human voice into consideration. One doesn't demand from them things that they are not meant to do and go against their nature. I don't regard the player of my viola alta as a virtuoso in the normal sense. Neither stunning rapid passages nor refined or bluffing difficulties are the main factors of his performance, but rather the vocal expression submerged in beautiful sound, in both piano and forte. The player shouldn't perform for the astonishment of his audience. Instead, the effect should be more of a musical reverence and satisfaction. Later, he adds something funny. It is completely false to produce a nasal sound. Yeah, we'll try to avoid that. Other musical personalities, mostly conductors and composers, became attracted to the sound of the viola alta. Some of them less known today, like Anton Rubinstein, Hans Pfitzner, or Max von Schillings. How many dedicated works were lost or remained unpublished is unclear. More research needs to be done to maybe excavate more compositions for this instrument. There was Felix Draeseke, in his time a well-known composer, who wrote 2 sonatas for the Ritter viola, one in 1892 and the other one in 1901. He writes to a friend, "It was exactly the very beautiful sound of the newly developed instrument that seduced me to even undertake such a task. The old viola would have not enthused me." In the meantime, due to the rise in popularity, the Ritter viola model was also built by other luthiers, sometimes badly. And even though Hermann Ritter welcomed the wider spread of his viola model by other builders, he responded to the copycats by branding his signature on the back of all following builds. A very unusual thing. It was like a very broad Hermann Ritter signature branded onto the wood, which is aesthetically questionable and it has never really done. Usually that would be in inconspicuous places. Quasi to protect his brand and the reputation of the real Ritter viola made in Würzburg against inferior fakes from elsewhere. And then there was still an army of musicians who remained steadfast in opposing the viola alta. Violinists playing small violas who must have suddenly felt as second-class violists against the Ritter viola wielding colleagues. Some orchestras turned their back on the viola evolution by forbidding them from being used. Hermann Ritter ironically uses an old saying to describe the situation. What is someone's owl is someone else's nightingale. There was, however, one violinist of name who didn't join the choir of naysayers. His name was Hans Sitt. Born into Bohemian violin dynasty and professor for violin at the prestigious Leipzig Conservatorium, he also was a serious violist. In fact, for 12 years he was the violist in the famous Brodsky Quartet. In 1894 he wrote a charming set of 3 fantasy pieces for the viola alta and piano, which we would like to perform now for you. The first fantasy, marked Allegro und poco agitato, is an energetic movement with lots of Sturm und Drang feeling in there. The second fantasy, an andante, can be described as a pleasant stroll on a sunny Sunday afternoon, like today. The third fantasy is an allegretto in salon music style. slowly come to the end of our presentation. Afterwards, the stage is open for your questions, if you have any. Now, why don't we see any more of these magnificent sounding instruments in our orchestras today, or, around? What happened that slowed down this promising development and eventually made the Viola Alta fade into the history books? And how much of the ideal that Ritter's Viola Alta represents has survived? To answer the first question, we can quite easily conclude that the main feature that made this model such a success in its roughly 50 years of the wider use also became its downfall, and that feature is its enormous size combined with the extra long string length. Yes, the Ritter viola helped the alto instrument out of its long wallflower status into the 20th century. More and more composers would discover its unique tone color in their works, both orchestral and solo. But the more sophisticated and technically demanding the music became, the more difficult to realize they would have become for the performers. Hermann Ritter died in 1926, and after that, the Ritter viola was truly out of fashion. There were earlier attempts, though, to tackle the issue of playability. From roughly the early 1890s, a fifth string was added to the instruments, an E string, like the high string on a violin, which made playing higher notes much easier. Ritter himself used such an improved model. But by 1910, even the Bayreuth Festival Orchestra compromised by having a smaller sized five-string Ritter viola built, most likely by the demand of the players, who tried heroically for decades to manage the difficult Wagner scores on the original giants. If I would imagine to play a Götterdämmerung on this, I think I would have to build up my strength and for quite a while. It is possible, and I haven't given up the project maybe to do our next ring opera, Siegfried, in November with this, but I can't promise yet. I have to see, because it's quite a task. But I strongly believe that Hermann Ritter's efforts were not in vain, which brings us to the second question of how much of Ritter's ideal has survived. We cannot say with absolute certainty that Hermann Ritter was the initial trigger or is the reason for the still ongoing efforts by luthiers to optimize violas and their playability. But we do have enough reason to believe that on his international concert tours, he attracted younger generations of players and luthiers that would have felt inspired by his uncompromising approach to make the alto as resonant as possible. Already during the 1930s, there were new attempts, especially in Britain, to construct violas that have broader bodies combined with a shorter string length in order to preserve the alto tone color while providing easy playability. Before we perform our last piece and open the floor for your questions, there is another curious bit of history that I would like to share with you. You might remember me mentioning before one of Ritter's best students, Michael Balling. During the 1880s, he established himself as a celebrated international viola soloist, like his teacher Hermann Ritter. He also conducted in Bayreuth and published a collection of Wagner songs, including the Wesendonck-Lieder. In 1894, this very Michael Balling moved all the way to New Zealand and became the first principal of the Music Conservatorium in Nelson, which was the first institute of its kind in all of Australasia. Go figure. During his time, he wrote a letter to the Nelson Evening Mail that I found quite funny, so I want to read it to you. So this is late 1890s. As a foreigner, I'm singularly struck by the prominence given to sport of all kinds, even to the extent of legal protection and encouragement within certain bounds. And while the colonial youth go home and take prizes in athletics against all comers, our musical students must at great cost proceed to Europe to learn even piano playing efficiently. With so much time and energy for sport, we may resolve to reserve a little for higher things such as music. It's Michael Balling in 1896. Yeah. So we'll wrap up this presentation with a beautiful work by Franz Liszt, also written, adapted for the Viola Alta. It's called Romance oubliée, Forgotten Romance. It was dedicated to Hermann Ritter in 1881. Again, birth year of Fafner here. Who knows how many times back then it has been played on this instrument. I always find this, as a player, the lineage to instruments and pieces and composers is quite, it feels special to be connected to somebody, who might have played this piece 150 years ago somewhere, Ritter added a little compositional supplement. The slow arpeggios at the end are a bow to Berlioz's symphonic drama Harold in Italy, which features a solo viola representing the hero on his journey.